Foreign. Before getting into today's stories, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. When my dad was a bit younger, he got into a serious car accident that left him with a few injuries. The other driver was at fault completely, and while the other driver's insurance covered the damages, my dad still suffered major pain and suffering. At the time, he never considered hiring a lawyer because the prospect of it was daunting, but little did he know he could have had a lawyer fighting for him without getting off his couch. Morgan & Morgan has modernized the injury law process so you can submit a claim and communicate with your legal team all from the convenience of your phone. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, having over 100 offices nationwide and more than 800 lawyers with over $15 billion recovered for clients. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. Submitting an injury claim with them is so easy that it's more like using an app rather than hiring a lawyer. In fact, it could even be compared more to ordering takeout than hiring a lawyer. In just 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave your couch. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. For more information, go to forthypeople.com, Mr. Nightmare, or dial #law, which is £529 from your cell phone. Console Boat. In the summer, he's the go-to friend to have for boat days. Since none of our other friends have a boat, I'm not a boat expert by any means, but my friend has some kind of radar on his boat that warns of any kinds of land masses, shallow waters, and other boats. So with that, we're able to stay out on the boat past dark. Sometimes the boat can fit like 8 people comfortably. This was on a hot summer day, mid-July. Kyle took 5 of us out on the boat just to drink in the bay. Then hours later, he took us to some waterfront bar, restaurant where we docked the boat, ate and drank, and chilled out for another few hours. We had an abundance of spiked seltzers in the cooler still, and it was a Friday night, so after leaving the restaurant, Kyle took us back to the middle of the lagoon where we cruise slowly with music blasting the whole time. Kyle doesn't really drink, so it works out that he's the one with the boat, and he just enjoys boating us around without having to drink. We passed by the lighthouse on the barrier island. We all had this conversation about how there's something so liminal and creepy about lighthouses. At night, Kyle cut the engine and we just floated in place for a while with the music still playing as everyone talked. I was kind of mesmerized by the lighthouse, finding myself looking at it over and over, I think because I was so drawn away from the conversation that was being had, that I was the one to pick up on a screaming voice from the distance. I said, "Yo, cut the music," a bunch of times before whoever was on AUX paused it. I said I heard a scream from the distance. We were currently floating next to an island that sat in the middle of the mainland and the barrier islands. We sat in silence for a few seconds as we bopped around, and sure enough, I was right. There was a woman screamed for help coming from that island. We all looked at each other and I could see the horror on my friends' faces. The screams were absolutely coming from the island. We were too far from both the mainland and the barrier island for it to be coming from there. We yelled back as loud as we could, and the woman's voice called back, "Help." We all screamed, "Where are you?" and the woman's voice called back, "On being followed." Communicating like this was hard as we could barely hear each other. One more time we called, "Are you on the island?" and she screamed back, "Yes." Kyle started the engine without hesitation. It started bringing us over to the island. He anchored us when we were close enough to the shore of the little island. All 6 of us got off the boat and started looking around and calling for the woman. This matter became a lot more concerning when she said, "I'm being followed." Asylum wasn't that big, and with 6 of us walking around with flashlights calling for her, surely we would have found her on the opposite side of the island. Suddenly we heard a blood-curdling woman scream, sounding like it was partially muffled. My friends and I all yelled at each other to meet on that side of the island. We all ran as fast as we could. I ran through painful brush barefoot, and by the time I got to the other side of the island, my feet were bleeding, but there was no one here. I met my friend Kyle and Jake, who were already there, and they said they heard the sound of a boat motor driving away. There was also a fresh wake in the water, clearly from a boat that just left, but it was too dark to see anything deeper into the water. I called 911 and reported this so that Bay Patrol could be on the lookout for any mysterious boats with its lights off. A Bay Patrol boat came to Kyle's boat, where we anchored, and we all frantically told the 2 officers aboard what just happened. They walkie-talkied to, I'm sure, every other boat on duty and it became a whole manhunt. I don't think the boat was ever found though because it didn't end up on the news or anything. All I know is there was no one on that island by the time we searched it. We were all so freaked out about this that Kyle brought the boat back to the marina and we all just ended up chilling in his backyard, talking about what happened. To this day, we still don't know what that was about. There were no news articles of missing women as far as we knew. W. Was it some kind of kidnapping or was it a group of playing some the prank? I don't think we'll ever know. Music. This is a story for my uncle and my dad that they've told countless times at family gatherings and it still creeps us all out just as much. It was the 80s. My dad and Uncle Jack have always been avid fishermen. They'd go out deep-sea fishing at least a few times a year in my uncle's boat. He had a 70s two-cabin cruiser. I've seen pictures, and the thing was huge. My uncle used to live in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where he'd dock his boat. My dad would go up there for a weekend, once in a while, to go out to sea for a night with my uncle. I've never been into fishing. My dad tried to get me into it, but it's not my thing. I'm also not going to pretend to know much about fishing, but I know the fish you catch will be bigger and more abundant the deeper into the ocean you go. I think they'd primarily go for striped bass, tuna, and cod. They'd go about 20 miles out to sea and just catch whatever they could fit on the boat. They used to be so obsessed that my uncle's walls in his house to this day are still covered 90% in pictures of him and my dad holding fish. This one time though, it was a very unexpectedly cloudy night and it was at new moon. They were currently in the cabin having a beer together playing cards after supper when something went wrong with the boat and the lights died. My Uncle Jack had to check the circuit panel, but doing so in the dark with nothing but a crappy flashlight was difficult though. Upon checking the circuit panel, my uncle learned that something caused two of the fuses to blow and conveniently eliminating almost all the lights on the boat, including the running lights. They didn't really have much of a choice other than to call it a night early and wait till dawn to head back to the shore, but within an hour was around the time they started to hear a humming type sound coming from around 20 meters in the horizon. They went out onto the deck of the boat. My dad always says it was nearly impossible to tell if his eyes were open or closed. That's how dark it was outside. There was a strange humming sound coming from behind the boat. Both my dad and uncle stepped to the stern of the boat and they realized the humming sound didn't sound like any kind of fish. They said it sounded like a person groaning, but even with the flashlight, they couldn't see beyond maybe 5 meters in front of them. It was starting to rain, so the two of them went inside the cabin. It would have been a horrible idea to try to drive the boat in pitch blackness in the rain, so they went to sleep. The next morning at the crack of dawn, my uncle woke up my dad and told him to come outside to the deck. Through the thick fog they could see another boat floating in the near distance. My uncle Jack drove the boat closer to the vessel and then blew the whistle he had on board to try to get anyone's attention who may have been in the cabin. The boat looked like it could have been abandoned though, so attaching a rope from one boat to another, my uncle jumped onto the boat. The cabin door was unlocked, stepped down into the cabin and smelled the disgusting, sickening smell of death. He saw a man hanging by a rope in the cabin. He ran back out and back onto his boat and tried to throw up into the water. My dad says he didn't even dare go down and see the body after his brother told him what he saw. My dad and Uncle Jack marked their current coordinates and contacted the nearest Coast Guard station through the VHF radio. The Coast Guard was there within an hour, and only then did my dad and uncle head back to the shore. They still don't know what the humming sound they heard was. This story really still haunts my uncle the most because he's the one who actually saw the dead body. They definitely together hold the scariest fisherman story I've ever heard. I live on a private canal in Florida. With my family, I'll keep the rest of my location private. Basically, it's a 15-minute ride out of the canal into the ocean. We have a couple jet skis and a boat, a 35-footer, 2007 Proline Express. My dad's baby, he's the boat guy. The jet skis are for my sister and I, so there's 4 of us in the house. My mom, dad, sister, and I. Am 23, she's 26. Nothing I say in the story will be me bragging at all. I'm just stating facts to help put the story into perspective. We have a few houses around the country, one in California, one in New York, and one in Florida. Our main house, I guess you could say, is our Florida house, because that's where my sister and I grew up and went to school. It's a negated community. Our parents are gone a lot of the time out of state, leaving the house to my sister and I and our dog. We have a nice house, and when we're alone we sometimes have parties and large gatherings in the backyard because our house is the last house on the canal, and next to the house is a little marsh. The canal keeps going a little bit beyond the house, then cuts off in the marsh, so in one direction we have complete privacy from any neighbors. One really hot day my sister and I took our jet skis out. Like I said, it's a 15-minute ride out of the canal where it opens up into a bay. Then we either ride in the bay or sometimes take it under the bridge and out into the ocean. Sometimes the ocean will be too choppy, though, so we usually ride in the bay. Depending on the tide, there's always a lot of boats hanging out in the bay area. After a while of riding around, we stopped in the middle of the bay to just chill out. Only minutes later, a medium-sized boat came over to us, and an older man driving it started making conversation with us. He had to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He was on the heavier side. He had a bit of a gut, and he had a beer in his hand as he's driving a boat. For the record, he basically opened up with asking about our jet skis and telling us about his jet skis and his huge house on the water. He invited us to come swim in his pool, and when we said no thanks, we have to head back soon, he asked where we're from. Like I said, I'm not bragging, but my sister and I are good looking, so we do get the occasional creepers talking to us. We were vague answering his question and just said from the area. My sister did the honors of turning her jet ski on first, indicating we were leaving. We waved goodbye in as friendly a way as possible and started riding around again. We looked at each other and laughed when we got away from his boat. He was mildly creepy for inviting two girls who could be his daughters to swim in his pool, but we've seen worse. Not long after we decided to call it a day and bring the skis in, we idled through the canal, and we were about 80% of the way there. We came to the part of the canal where it intersects with our canal, kind of like a T-intersection, and we were now in our part of the canal when we noticed a boat not far behind us in the intersecting part we just passed. It looked like the boat of the man who stopped us before. He was just very slowly drifting forward, passing our canal. We didn't know if he followed us or if he lived down the intersecting canal, but we continued home and docked our jet skis. What happened next was where things got really weird. We were washing our jet skis and we noticed the man's boat approaching our house in the canal. He stopped his boat right in front of our dock and started talking to us again, with his creepy smile complimenting our house and backyard. My sister came out and said what was on both of our minds. Why did you follow us here? That's really creepy. He replied that he lives in the community as well and just wanted to check our canal out. I think he got the hint that we weren't comfortable and didn't want to talk to him. He turned his boat around in the marshy area and waved goodbye to us. Neither of us waved back. There's a certain point where you cut the friendly act when people are so outwardly creepy and weird. That was one of those times. We called our dad and told him about the creep. He wasn't happy with us for not getting the registration on his boat, which neither of us thought to do. Sadly, things didn't end there. It was later that night that our dog started barking downstairs in the middle of the night. Both my sister and I woke up to it. I looked out my bedroom window to the backyard, and I swear to God I saw a large person running across the yard towards the dock, then jumping into something in the water. I lifted the window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. My sister and I ran downstairs to look out the back door with the lights on. Whoever it was gone, but we'd be kidding ourselves if we said we didn't know who it was. It had to be that creepy man who followed us home. I think having a big dog in the house was the only reason he didn't break into the house. We asked the neighbors on our canal if any of them had cameras that could see the boat from earlier, or perhaps anyone coming down the canal in the middle of the night. Our luck, no one in this gated community really has cameras, not in their backyards, at least anytime we go out on the boat or jet skis. Now I feel like in the back of our heads we're always looking for that man and his boat now.